everyone. I'm Jon Evans. Welcome to another episode of One-on-One. Howie Franklin has spent more than 40 years working around airplanes, the last 23 as the director of the Cape Fear Jetport in Oak Island. They call it the Little Airport with the big heart. But before that, he spent 18 years working on the most famous airplane in the world, Air Force One, as flight steward and later chief steward to 5 different presidents of the United States, each the most powerful man in the world at the time. He must have done something right because he kept the job while working for Democrats and Republicans, for presidents from the West Coast, from the North, from the South, and from the Southeast. A storied career, all made possible by a decision Howie Franklin made when he was 20 years old.
1965, I was living in the South Shore, Long Island, and with a Barrier Island. I worked on Fire Island at these yacht clubs and things of that nature. And I got drafted. I was 20.
Right.
There was no military around, and I still had an option. I was supposed to get drafted the 17th of August going in. So I went to an Army recruiter, and I said to the Army recruiter, look, if I go in drafted, it's 2 years. If I enlist, it's 3 years. I said, if I enlist and I'm a volunteer, do I get a better opportunity to get my career field that I want if I'm a volunteer? Very lucky. Big black sergeant, sharp as he could be in his uniform, looked at me, he said, son, in the Army, no matter how high you test, you always test highest in the infantry.
Oh, there you go.
So me and my friends figured out, we all got hit. And we were 20. There was kids that's 19 and 18 got hit before us somehow. We all got hit together. Sat on my porch, and I said, I had a cousin who was in the Air Force. And they said, yeah. I said, I don't think those guys carry guns. So we figured out, General Krulak, the former commandant of the Marine Corps, asked me one time, Howie, why did you join the Air Force? I said, well, sir, I figured out the United States Air Force during 1965, the Vietnam era, when I still had an option, was the only armed forces in the United States of America that the enlisted man was not the primary resource to get shot. So in the Air Force, they shot the officers. Well, that was a serious consideration to me. Remember, I had still an option.
Sure.
My country said go, I'd go, but I still had an option. Got in the Air Force, didn't like it. Didn't like the military. I was in food service, which I put in for because I wanted to travel around the world on a freighter, see the world. Because I had worked for former chefs that had been all over the world, and they gave me this picture, and boy, I wanted to see the world. And didn't like where I was stationed, Rapid City, South Dakota. Hated it. Hate the Air Force. Next thing you know, I get an assignment to Guam. I run into a friend of mine that just came back from Guam, and I said, how is it? He said, I'm glad to get back to South Dakota. I said, oh, my God. So I go to Guam. I'm hating Guam. I hate what I do. I hate the Air Force. And I worked in an in-flight kitchen. And these flight crew came in. They liked me. They liked my personality. And they said to me, Howie, he said, we'd like to cross-train you into the flight attendant career field. And I said, what's the flight attendant career field? Well, they told me they're going to take care of the generals. You're going to prepare meals on the airplane, take care of the crews, things of that nature. You do it. You're already in food service. You're just doing it on an airplane. I said, I didn't even know they had a job like that. And so I said, what do I got to do? They said, well, we've checked your records. You're going to extend 8 months over your 4-year commitment. I said, hey, you got the wrong guy. Are you kidding me? I hate the...
Yeah, you didn't like what you were doing anyway, right?
I can't wait to get back. I lived in Bayport, Long Island, South Shore, the most gorgeous place in the world for me.
Yeah.
Okay? And in fact, I grew up there thinking everybody lived that way until I left, So I said, no, you got the wrong guy. So they said, well, listen, they must have wanted me. I think about this now real bad because they said, well, let's put you on one flight to see if you like it. And I'm thinking, I get to go off Guam. Okay, let's go. So
just on with one of the generals, or
one of the generals.
Okay.
There was one general and 25 full colonels, so VIP. So there was another flight attendant, myself, and we served meals and took care of them and went to Okinawa. 2 days in Okinawa. I'm a young guy. I'm 22 years old now, and I'm in Okinawa. Run into my best friend from Bayport, a Marine. Time of my life in Okinawa. Time of my life. Better than Bayport. I'm having fun. Then we go to Taipei, Taiwan for 5 days. The time of my life. And then the thing that caught my attention, the flight crew appreciated what I did. And they treated me with dignity. As an enlisted man food service, we were the lowest people on the base. The people who worked in the sewer treatment plant had a higher prestige than the cooks.
Really?
Yeah, it was just treated like terrible.
Oh.
And to a certain extent, there's some of it still goes on like that. So here I am being appreciated and treated by officers, treating me nice, talking to me like I'm a human being. And that was nice. I came back from the trip and the crew was joking with me. What are you going to do, son? What are you going to do? You think, I know you like it. What are you going to do? I said, well, sir, I don't know. I can't think about re-enlisting. That's terrible. And they said, well, you got to go to personnel. I said, what's for personnel for? He said, well, you got to get per diem. I didn't even know what per diem was. And they told me, well, you got paid so much a day for every day you were out on a trip. And I said, you paid me? I would have paid you.
Right, to get off Guam at this point, right?
Yeah. So my needle went from hate, if you can imagine, hate, military, hate, job, hate, what I'm doing. Man of my country for putting me this, here I wanted to go on, but I was not getting shot at, but personally I didn't like it. To, hey, I like what I'm doing. Worked for a general. Well, what gave me an edge, but when I grew up on Fire Island, I worked at a private yacht club called Talisman Yacht Club. This was for the jet set of the 60s, the big-time money. Like the 1%ers of today, that's what we're at, this club. And I worked for all these multimillionaires, and I dealt with them. When I ended up, I'll jump to Air Force One. Right. 18 years on Air Force One, very few times did I ever have people of the same caliber of the level of the people that worked at that was guests at my yacht club. Right. Except for one gentleman, his name was Ambassador Reed. He was the protocol ambassador to the United States of America under George H. Bush. And when I talked to him, he knew everybody at the club. So
there you go. So you had ties back to your old times.
Yeah, but the thing was that I had this experience. The guys and the gals that were in my career field had the experience that they learned in the Air Force. So I learned everything that the Air Force taught me, plus I had this other knowledge. I knew what vichyssoise was. I knew, and I would make New York deli sandwiches. They never had us. They used to sandwich with a slice of cheese and a slice of ham, and I was building them a deli sandwich, and so they appreciated it. So that gave me an edge. General Gillum, a very famous name in the Air Force, took a liking to me. And he said he ended up putting me in the 89th Military Airlift Wing.
And that was at Andrews?
At Andrews. So, I like what I'm doing. I don't know if I like the military, but I like what I'm doing. And so they said, you're going up there for 45 days to see if the outfit likes you, the VIP outfit likes you, and if you like it. Well, I get there, and I got airplanes with windows and galleys, and they're flying Secretary of State, Secretary of Defense. Hey, I can do this. Yeah. It's still hard for me to believe, as much hatred I had for the military, that I would do that. But I had this job that I loved. I loved what I did.
What did you want to do as a kid? I mean, you grew up in Long Island. You said you worked at the yacht club. You dealt with the DiMaggios and some of those. But what did you want to do as a kid growing up? What did you do as a kid there in the 40s and the 50s?
Well, Bayport, Long Island was like Southport, Oak Island. I mean, we were watermen. We went clamming. We went fishing. Didn't really have any idea. But when I worked at this private yacht club, I worked for a French chef, Italian chef, a Yugoslavian chef. The Yugoslavian chef was in a concentration camp in Europe as a Jewish person. Wow. Had the tattoo on her arm. The story she told me was beyond imagination. But the last chef I worked for was George Garofalo. They called him Farouk because he looked like King Farouk. Been all over the world. Told me about this world. And at 16, 17, I knew I wanted to see the world. Okay. A gentleman named Harry Theodore Acropolis owned Greek International Lines, one of my customers. He liked us. He knew us. When I got drafted, we went into New York, and it was funny. His kids went into New York to see Harry Theodore Acropolis, the CEO of this major corporation, owns this big skyscraper, and we got escorted up to the CEO's place. We're young kids. And I said to him, sir, I was going to go out, you were going to get me on a ship, Greek ship, travel around the world, but I'm getting drafted. If I go in the Air Force, put in for food service, when I finish my tour, can I get with you and go on a nicer passenger line? And this gentleman says, sure, Howie, no problem. I'm thinking it's a big deal. It's not a big deal to him. Right. So that's what I wanted to do, and I ended up, did I see the world? I saw it more. I realized that ship and airplanes were faster. Yeah.
But you said, I've read and I've heard you speak and I've watched videos of you speak, but you said that, when you dealt with these high-priced people in Long Island, you realized that they were just human beings. The guys put their pants on one leg at a time. The ladies wanted a glass of water just like they wanted a fork for their salad. They were human beings, and it seemed to me you related to that more than, oh, wow, there's another star, or, oh, wow, there's another star.
Yeah, it was, well, I grew up, that was, you grew up in that environment. and you actually think everybody lived that way, but they don't. They were, first of all, they were successful people, and they were old money. Okay, and so they treated us. They appreciated what we did. Us kids literally ran this yacht club. Okay, so that was a tremendous experience. But yes, what you said is people are real, and that helped me because I've never been starstruck because of that.
Right. And you dealt, and you learned as then you get at Andrews Air Force Base, and then all of a sudden, the crew must have liked you then because you're then in 1976 assigned to the the aircraft, and then to what was Air Force One whenever the president flew. Right.
Absolutely, but I had another trainer. Remember, Talisman was my trainer. Another trainer. I got put with Dr. Kissinger doing the shuttle diplomacy flights all over the world. John, that was the most exciting moment in my life to this day. If you can imagine carrying Henry Kissinger. And Henry Kissinger traveled and ruled his management. He was warlord management. He ruled by fear and intimidation. And it was incredible. We'd take off from Andrews, and it would say, my itinerary would say, Andrews to London and as directed. And I'm supporting all the food service and the service needs of this person, and I don't know where the hell I'm going. Right. Okay, and the next morning I get up and we end up going to Moscow, and then that afternoon we go to Tel Aviv, and that evening I'm in Aswan, Egypt. And I finally convinced the State Department. I said, look, I don't need to know where we're going. I need to know when we're going. And they understood that. There was times with Dr. Kissinger that the navigator and myself were the only people on the airplane knew where we were going. And we were doing that shuttle diplomacy all over the world. And the embassies in the Middle East hated me because that's what I'd go get the food, because my job is to make sure this food is portable and being consumed.
I was going to ask you, that was one of the main duties of the steward, to make sure. Now, did Dr. Kissinger have food that he liked to eat? Did you cook for him and everybody else got what he wanted? How did all that work?
No, we would plan the menus. And Steve on Air Force One, they plan the menus.
Okay.
And we planned the menus. Now, I got briefing down in the State Department. He had cholesterol, so he wasn't supposed to eat eggs, and he was supposed to eat the no cholesterol eggs and the bacon and things of that nature. And I'd buy all that stuff, and he'd ask me what I had, and he said, "What do you mean? I don't eat that." So he never ate the stuff that was supposed to eat. Okay, but
yeah.
he and then we were over there and feeding him constantly, the same people all the time. If I flew congressional junkets, what they call, I could have a set menu, and I do these four breakfasts, 4 lunches, 4 dinners, and then I leave them. But Henry Kissinger, we got with him all the time, so I had to vary the meals. Once in a while I'd have hot dogs.
Oh, really?
And our joke was, I'd bring all the regalia from Washington, D.C., from McDonald's. Now, McDonald's fairly, didn't have a lot of competition.
Right at the time,
yeah,
right.
The only thing, food, I bought the apples in the container, but I bought all the regalia. We cooked our own French fries and our own hamburgers, and we served McDonald's on the airplane. And they say we're coming out of Cairo. We give them a McDonald's. They loved it. I mean, It was a visual. I have a picture in my office of Kissinger standing there without his jacket on, and the steward standing behind him, and he's got a little gleam in his eye, and he's got a McDonald's hat on.
Uh-oh.
Now, the CEO of McDonald's carries that still in his office.
That's awesome.
But anyway, he looked at me with a gleam in his eye, and you see this gleam, he said, "What am I, the manager?" The key is the training that I had with him. Now, my training, let me give you this. The people that worked for Henry Kissinger was a gentleman named Al Hay. He started out with Henry Kissinger as a full colonel, became a 4-star general, became the
Secretary of State.
Supreme Allied Commander in Europe. He was a chief of staff for several other presidents, and he became Secretary of State. There was a guy named Lawrence Eagleburger, I knew him when he was a GS-10.
Yeah,
okay,
yeah.
He was one of the tight guys with Henry Kissinger, became Secretary of State. There's a gentleman that people don't know. His name was Winston Lord. Winston Lord he was on Kissinger's staff. He became the second ambassador to Red China. So I could go on. There's all kinds of names. And I became the chief on Air Force One. So that was my trainer.
Yeah. So you get there, and you're the first of your 5 presidents, President Ford. And I want to go through your book, Yes, Sir, Mr. President. I encourage it because it's an awesome read. But at any point in time, did you ever feel unsafe flying with those VIPs, flying with presidents, flying with the congressional folks, flying with Dr. Kissinger?
Yeah. Well, it was common, believe it or not. According to Secret Service that I knew, a president of the United States of America that is not really doing anything that affects people's emotions, things, get about 1,000 death threats a day. Okay. Now, when you're doing something, you get a president that's doing something that affects and emotions. That thing multiplies. It squares itself. I mean,
right.
So what we used to get very common, and they probably still do, is bomb threats on the airplane. So, I mean, we'd be getting ready to take off, and the pilots would call back and say, "We got a bomb scare," and we always felt confidence what the crew did.
Sure.
We have policies and procedures to follow to make sure there's no bomb put in our luggage. Did the passengers do it?
Right.
There's other people. You're always concerned. And finally, when we took off and everything, that was a very common thing, and you never knew. I mean, we followed all the procedures. The Secret Service, they checked the bags, but things could happen.
Right.
And they didn't have the technology that they have now. But that was a common issue, bomb scares.
Yeah, so you're flying, and then Gerald Ford becomes president. He was appointed to the presidency. You're appointed as chief steward. So you had something in common with the very first president that you served.
Yeah, well, there's a picture in my office, and I think it's in the book. It was a picture of an Air Force II. I was an Air Force II steward, and it was my birthday, 30th birthday, and he was congratulating my birthday. Well, see, I flew with him as a congressman. He was a congressman for quite some time. So I knew him as a congressman. Now he becomes vice president. He knows me personally as a steward. And then he got appointed to the presidency. 6 months later, I was flying with Henry Kissinger. I was in South America. A phone call came in through the airplane. Charlie Palmer, the chief flight attendant, wanted to see me. So that was the phone call everybody was waiting for, and I was lucky enough to get the phone call. Said to me, "We'd like to hire you, but I can't guarantee you a job. We could have election. They could change crews. So if you're willing to do that, we'd like to have you." And I said, "Yes, I would." Well, so now I get on Air Force One, and President Ford sees me, knows me, for quite some time, grabs my jacket, says, "Howie." I said, "Yes, sir." He said, "Remember, I got here first."
But it seemed to me that you had to be non-political.
Absolutely.
In what you were doing, because you served with both Democrats and Republicans. So you had a job to do. No matter what their politics was, you were serving the office holder at the time, right?
Absolutely. And I was just at a briefing a Clemson group, lives in Brunswick County, and all went to Clemson. And one of the people that were in the briefing about Air Force One was a former military aide during the Clinton days, and knew me on the airplane. Military aides, they carry the football. Okay, they're right there with the president all the time. They're either on the golf course or in the big meetings. They're right next to him. They stay with him. They also see the political picture of everything. This gentleman was very gracious. At the end of my talk, he said to the group, "Ladies and gentlemen, I don't think you'll ever be able to understand how he worked for 5 presidents. I was there. All he had to do was tick one senior staff person off, and he was gone."
Right.
And that was very common. So Marlon Fitzwater had said that it was very uncommon for somebody to be there for 5 presidents. No one else has. I was very flexible. And I spoke to Chancellor UNCW one time, and I talked to her secretary, and she said to me, "How in the world did you get to work for 5 presidents consecutively without getting fired?" I said, "Well, you find out what they want you to do and do it with a good attitude." She said, "That's right. That's how I've stayed here. Yeah. Attitude will take you a long ways."
Sure. Did you have to get to know each one of the presidents? Did you have to get to know them? I mean, did you get to know them personally? Did you like to know their habits? Did you have to study? What was the key to success?
Well, that's the key. The key to success is my training at Talisman Yacht Club.
Okay.
Truly that's what I did there, and that's what I just took that same thing, plus what I learned in the military. Yeah, you had to study them, you have to realize. But believe it or not, on Air Force One, the easiest pasture we had was usually the president. It's the staff and the other people and the press and things of that nature. Those are the people that's more demanding than the president. My friend Steve Lomanak worked for George W. Bush. George W., he wants a peanut butter and jelly sandwich and a glass of milk.
Right.
But yeah, you had to study them. You had to know, and you have to know when to speak, when not to speak, and you have to really feel yourself out. We read books on Dress for Success, Dale Carnegie courses. Those are valuable things to understand and to know. So we worked at that, but being yourself and having a good attitude.
Could you tell the weight of the world was on these men?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mentioned the other day, I was speaking at a Veterans Day the other day. Two things that really affected my value of Veterans Day. Okay, but I value, no, pardon me, not Veterans Day, Memorial Day. When I was a kid, it was time to go to the beach. It was a good time, beginning of summer. When I was on Guam, it still was until one day I had to deliver box lunch meals to a aerovac coming out of Vietnam. That changed my life. I mean, when I walked up on the airplane and saw these kids younger than me shot out bleeding, you know, who am I complaining about the Air Force? Are you kidding? Right. You know, my God. And several experiences like that. One of my other bigger experiences, we were with Ronald Reagan in California on vacation. The Marines got hit in Lebanon. We got alerted. Everybody rushes to the airplane to get the president there. We fly. I'm working, taking care of the president in his stateroom. He was extremely moved. He was extremely taken. He realizes, and they all do, regardless of their politics, they take it very serious. They put these gentlemen or ladies, people in harm's way for reasons that they believe in, and they take it extremely serious. That day flying back, that was a tremendous, experience for me.
Jimmy Carter, your first experience, I've heard you say, with a Southern gentleman and a genteel lady, his wife.
What
was that 4 years like?
Yeah, the President Carter was my first experience with wonderful Southern people, and President Carter's an engineer. And,
right.
I don't mean anything negative, but engineers are different. They're wired different than everybody else. I mean, ask a realtor. Sell a house to an engineer. That's the way they're wired. So he's an engineer, and that's why he got a little bit of trouble supposedly scheduling the tennis courts at the White House. Yeah. Whatever. But anyway, he was a born-again Christian. He preached that. Let me give you this. Every president that I worked for, I witnessed them reading the Bible. And they didn't read the Bible to impress me. I had walked into the stateroom and seen them read, Bill Clinton included. Okay? There's an Air Force One Bible on the airplane, and that happens. And then Mrs. Carter, who was this wonderful Southern genteel lady. She was just tremendous, and I traveled extensively with her because when President Carter decided his dedication to get our people released from Iran, Mrs. Carter went out on a campaign trail.
So you were with her maybe even more toward the end of his term than you were with him oftentimes.
Yeah, they peeled myself and Denny Stump off.
Okay.
And how good the White House is. One time, I'm trying to keep in communication. He'd take one trip, I take the other trip. So I got to get in touch with him. Then he's out. When the First Lady flies, she flies on a squadron airplane. She don't fly on Air Force One. Okay, it's a squadron airplane, and out of this group of aircraft. And I called the White House. This is how good the technology even was then. I said I need to get Denny Stump. So anyway, Denny's on the ramp on the DC-9 in Chicago, and President Carter is there also on Air Force One. The president leaves, and where the president's airplane was, there used to be a phone on a pedestal when they had dial phones, and it had lights on it. So that was about 100, 200 yards away. The pilot on the First Lady's airplane sees this phone, and the lights go off. And he says to Denny Stump, who's an Air Force One steward, Denny, look, that phone's ringing over there. I wonder who it's for. So Denny walked over 100 yards, picks up the phone, and he's talking on the phone. So he comes back, and the pilot's interested. Who was it for? He said it was for me.
It was not for the president. It was for you.
Yeah, it was White House found him.
Right.
And I was talking to him, what did you serve? I don't want to serve the same dessert or the same entrees and things of that nature. I want you to know the pilot on the DC-9 was totally impressed.
There you go. I was going to say, you had connections, didn't you? And then Ronald Reagan comes in, and he's the one you worked with for the longest period of time. Right. 8 years you spent with him. And I've heard you speak about, at the beginning, you really weren't sure about this actor coming into the White House at some point, right?
Yeah, well, we're not political, but we stay educated. I'm a history buff, okay?
Sure.
So I actually liked Bush's resume. You compare Bush's resume at that time to Ronald Reagan's resume. I was never a non-fan, but his movies were, to me, B movies and things of that nature.
Mm-hmm.
But I did know that he was the governor of California, and I found out that he took the governorship. It was California was in the red deep, and when he left, it was in the black. So those are good stats. For 8 years, I said, when are you going to get here? I tried to catch that person being insincere, because some politicians are. What you see on television is different behind the scenes. Not everybody, but everybody is different. I couldn't do it. The guy was sincere all the time, and his leadership skills. If I went into his stateroom and offered him something as insignificant, I'd look in. The doctors tell us to drink water. Well, him and Nancy did it. They got it.
Mm-hmm.
We'd keep their water glass full all day.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd look in the stateroom and I'd see his water glass down. I'd get a fresh glass of water, and I'd walk in and exchange it. He would do something, and I wasn't looking for it. But every time
you were just doing your job.
I'm just doing my job, and he would do something non-verbally or verbally to raise my self-esteem.
An eye wink, something.
Yeah, just something. It was a positive reinforcement that he appreciated what we were doing. That's a boss.
Yeah.
Now, for a boss to do that to other people, they have to be very secure in themselves. Otherwise, you can't do that to other people.
Right. Did you know your place? Did you have to, if they were in could you sense if a conversation was deep in that you aren't going to go in for this second? How did that work?
Yeah, we had personal access to the president. If the Secret Service sat outside the room, if they wanted to go see the president, they would ask us. But we had this responsibility of, we could open the door and walk in. Now there's responsibility. You don't walk in when, you don't want to bother. Your job is not to bother. Your job is to serve the people. And we understood that. So, yeah, there's a lot of responsibility there.
Did you ever maybe get in there and I mean, I know this is, completely from maybe a movie, something you might see, but a discussion and they say, what do you think, Howie? Any of those kind of things ever come up?
With Clinton.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Well, Bill Clinton President Clinton was 1 year younger than me, and he liked me. And I liked him. We're not talking politics here.
Right.
And
but you had something in common age-wise.
Yeah, we had something in common age-wise, and the same time that we grew up. He was the first president to ever listen to rock and roll. I mean, I like that. I like rock and roll.
Mm-hmm.
And not that the other presidents, they liked music. They liked various kinds of music. Most of them played country music, which is fine. I like country music. But, the sad stuff, my marriage is a failure. My divorce is a failure. My marriage is a failure. My divorce isn't working out either. Stuff
right,
like
yeah,
that.
That's the country songs.
Yeah, that's fine. But here he is. This guy's listening to the Four Tops.
Nice.
I love it.
Yeah.
One time I walked in the room and he was playing loud rock and roll. Well, I'm one of those guys like loud rock and roll. And I walk in the stateroom and he looks up to me and says, Howie, he said, is this too loud? I said, sir, I've been waiting for a guy like you to come along for a long time.
What about the first President Bush? I don't want to skip over him because you said he liked peanut butter and jelly sandwiches.
No, that's George W.
Oh, that's George W. Okay.
No, President Bush, now this is a guy, I don't know if people realize it. He's the only person ever was president in the United States that owned his own company for over 26 years, ran his company in the black for 26 years. People were counting on him to make a profit, which is not a dirty word, so he can make a payroll so people can make a house payment. He's the only person that ever did that I know in the history of the whole country, okay? A great businessman, a great person. I want you to know that their whole family is tight. They're close. They compete in sports. When they compete with each other in sports, they're trying to beat each other up. I mean, it's competitive and things of that nature. A gracious person. Now, the difference between, but he was a little bit, he liked to move fast. He liked to do a lot of things. Say George H. Bush administration and the Reagan administration. Number one, Reagan administration, I'm going to say, is one of the most organized administrations ever hit the White House. I truly believe that. If they find out somebody else that was more organized. And he was also what I consider very civilized, because in 8 years, and talk to flight crew people, we never took off any earlier than 9:30.
So he'd like to sleep in a little bit, right?
Well, he came from the age group. You work from 9 to 5,
right.
And at 5 o'clock we're going to sit. So in other words, if we did an economic summit in Japan, we would go to L.A. for 2 days, and then from L.A. for 2 days we go to Hawaii for 2 days. Now he's working, okay, because he played golf once a year, so he's working. The crew may be playing golf, but he's working. And then we go to Guam for 2 days or 1 day, and then he'd fly into Japan, and the man was fresh. He's ready to go.
He was on the ball?
He's on the ball. He's not jet-lagged as like someone else. Now, George H. Bush, God bless him, and I love him, we take off at 7 in the morning, fly 13 and a half hours to Honolulu. And that means, and I'm not complaining, at 7 in the morning, I got up at 3.
Yeah.
And you get your best rest the last part of your last 3-hour sleep cycle, so they're blowing that away. I would have rather take off in the evening because I got a good night's sleep and then was up all day versus being up all day, no night's sleep, and then going to work for 2 days.
Yeah, there you go. I'm gonna just ask you a couple of things here. Best perk over your time on Air Force One. Best thing that you got because you were on Air Force One.
Well, I think the best perk is that being around the airplane. To this day, when I see it, I quiver a little bit.
Do you?
Yeah.
We still do touch and goes here in Wilmington's airport, so it's in the air here every once in a while.
Well, initially, the navigator that used to be on the airplane, he came down and visited us down here, and he loves it, so he used to do that to jab me a little bit. But now they found out, why do they come here? It's 45 minutes from Andrews. You have great weather.
Right.
And that's why they come here.
But your heart skips a beat?
Yeah, absolutely. That part of it. There was a big part of it. I remember when I was in the squadron and I'd see this hangar with Air Force One, 2 Air Force One airplanes. And then I was an augmentee. That means I could go on a trip because somebody was sick because I had the clearance, but I wasn't a permanent crew member. And the day that I was they gave me a line badge that said I can walk into that hangar without somebody escorting me was a big day.
Yeah.
Okay. The next big day when I became the chief flight attendant, that day when I want to give Jon Evans a show and tell on Air Force One, I could do it without going through the pilot's office.
There you go.
That's probably the biggest perk. And you do a lot of show and tells and things of that nature. So now we traveled around. A lot of times we played free golf. We were on the Arcadian Hall show. The crew was on the Johnny Carson show. We gave the windshield wiper wave. They introduced the crew. We had a lot of things like that. Mm-hmm. But I think the airplane itself, to this day, I think all crew members will say the same thing.
Best trip you ever went on?
Best trip? Oh, well, California. President Reagan, we go to California. If we took off from Washington and we were going to Ohio, Reagan would say, we're going in the right direction. We're not going far enough. Mm-hmm. We spent 683 days in California in 8 years.
Wow.
You're living in Washington, D.C. in February, and we're going to Oxnard, California.
That works.
That works.
Yeah.
The food's great in California, and we were getting paid while we were in California. We played golf, so going back and forth and if you imagine, he'd go out there for 30 days. So we'd serve a lunch on the airplane, and sit for 30 days, and then serve a lunch on the airplane and go back to Washington D.C. Not a bad deal. We used to say, I wonder what everybody else is doing.
Worst trip you ever went on?
Well, probably the worst trips I ever went on were probably with Henry Kissinger, okay? But with George H. Bush, again, we left at 7 in the morning, mm-hmm. and we flew to Daytona Beach, sat on the ground for 3.5 hours. We then left from Daytona Beach and flew to Charlotte, North Carolina, and sat on the ground for 2.5 hours. Then we flew to Andrews Air Force Base and sat on the ground for 3.5 hours. He went jogging while he was at Andrews, okay? And then we took off from Andrews Air Force Base, flew to Munich, to Warsaw, Poland. Now, remember what I did earlier that. Yeah. Now, this is 10 hours to Warsaw, Poland. And the key, that thing that'll kill you, is 5 hours on the ground in Warsaw, Poland. And then we flew to Munich, Germany for an economic summit. We served a full salmon, beautiful dinner. Mm-hmm. Now, I commended my flight attendants and my crew. At the end there was like 38 hours. Okay.
Wow.
And they walked off the airplane. I said, "You guys, you know how great you are?" And they said, "What do you mean?" I said, "You walked off that airplane and you're still friendly to each other."
Yeah, there you go.
Okay.
Speaking of friendly, did you ever catch a president's ire because of maybe a trip he had taken? I remember President Reagan, had some trips where, discussions may not have gone all that well or something like that. And you could tell in his face sometimes he didn't have a very good trip. Did you ever catch any of the president's ire, like, oh, not now, Howie, or anything like that?
No.
They're all just very civil gentlemen?
They understand the politics.
Right.
All things are politics. Your job's politics. Everything.
Right.
They understood that. They were at that level. So, if things didn't go well, they took it in stern, in whatever they
Never took it out on you or the crew?
No, never.
Anybody that just wrinkled your sheets that one day you just didn't care for that you had on the plane at any point?
Yeah, absolutely. In my book, there was a gentleman named Jody Powell. He was the press secretary. He's not alive right now.
For President Carter.
For
yes.
President Carter. He was the press secretary. He was thrown, according to what I was told, he was thrown out of the Air Force Academy for cheating. So guess what? He didn't like the Air Force. Now he's on Air Force One as the press secretary. He was, number one, he was vulgar. Probably the most vulgar passenger I ever had.
Right.
Okay. And he didn't like us. During the Carter administration, the thing that was unique, everybody on the airplane, the passengers and the crew, pays for their meals. Mm-hmm. Okay. So in other words, whatever I spend, I divide it by the number of people that I bought for. Now, if you don't eat, that's fine. Mm-hmm. We just take a loss. That's, But if you do eat, we bill it at the end of the day. At the end of the day, you had breakfast, you had lunch, you had a snack, you had a drink, things of this nature. And at the end of the day, I would stamp it with a pilot stamp, mm-hmm. and we'd turn these into our office, and they would send it to the White House, because all those people that fly on Air Force One, including the president, have per diem.
Sure.
Okay? So it should be paid for. Historically, I understand during the Nixon days, before all the investigations, they used to be free. But they found out, well, we ought to, they're getting per diem. Why should they get free meals? During the Carter administration, the unique thing about it, for some reason, what I felt, that they didn't trust us.
Oh.
So at the end of the day, I had to go to each person and let them see the bill. Now, how are we going to cheat them?
Right.
Okay?
Yeah.
Well, what happened with Jody is I remember giving him the bill. And he took the bill, signed it, wrinkled it up, and he threw it at me with a face of disdain.
Wow. So
that's why I get him in the book, okay? Yeah. That was probably the one that, now, and when he first came on the airplane, for the first 2 months, he used to refer to the president as Jimbo.
President Carter?
Jimbo. Jimbo said this, Jimbo said that. Now, finally, he changed. He was President Carter. But that was the person that, out of all the people I traveled for, that I wasn't very pleased with. But I still kissed his butt. Okay.
All right, tell me about the media, because I'm sure, it's a different media back when you started in 76 to 94. You don't have social media. You don't have Facebook. What was traveling with the media like? Were they asking you to be a source? What's going on? Did you have to bite your tongue?
Oh, yeah. You had to watch what you said and things of this nature. First of all, I was trained well, again, because of the Kissinger days. Mm-hmm. When I was flying with Henry Kissinger, and I'll mention some names, there was a gentleman named Barry Schweid. Okay. He was a news reporter. I don't know what, AP or something like that. There was a gentleman who used to do Nightline, Ted Koppel.
Right.
These are the reporters, okay? Marvin Kalb. Marvin Kalb was the reporter.
CBS News.
Just for Walter Cronkite, okay? My point is that the press that traveled with Kissinger were senior press people compared to the White House people. Why? Because he was making news.
Yeah.
And these were a class act. And I, coming from Long Island in the area, multi-faceted people, I enjoyed them. I was probably one of the few crew members that did like the press. Mm-hmm. I used to get a big, they make their money by using the English language, okay, and writing. And I used to really enjoy watching them compete with each other. And they would using the English language to tell each other to get screwed without using vulgarity.
Did any of them ever ask you to be a source or ask you for anything like that you had to turn them down or say, that's not me?
Yeah, that would happen. Not very often. Now, a scary moment in my life, Helen Thomas, senior White House correspondent, I used to take very good care of Helen. And Helen was the type of person, she wanted a bologna sandwich and a half a cup of coffee. And I had when she walked on the airplane, there was a half a cup of coffee there. So one time when Reagan was running for office, they were talking about running the gentleman from Texas that was hit down he was a governor. Conley.
Oh, yes, John Conley, yes.
John Conley. Well, he kind of had a past that was a little, twisted or whatever. Mm-hmm. Anyway, Helen comes on the airplane and she looks ahead in the galley. She said, "Howie, what do you think of John Connally running for president?" I said, "Sir, I don't know. Do you think he passed the security clearance?" And she thought that was hysterical. And I go, "Oh,
Oh, no.
yeah, I can see it right now, right up."
There you go.
Howie says.
Any movie, any TV show that you can remember show what the inside of Air Force One was like better than any other?
I think the Air Force One movie, and I had talked to the people who called me while I was...
With Harrison Ford?
Yeah, with Harrison Ford. Is very, very close as it can be. Now, I was just on a set in House of Cards. This
Yes,
is for the,
yeah.
and I was there reviewing their set of Air Force One. Excellent.
Oh, nice.
Absolutely excellent. But the Harrison Ford movie, they did good. Now, the things that weren't true, when they were in the belly and the refrigerators and the freezers didn't have a glass door, because the glass door in the movie, they were showing Heineken's beer. So they were getting paid for that.
Oh, yeah, product placement. There you go, right.
Yeah. And the other thing is you can't fire guns all over an airplane. You can't do that. There's no escape pod or anything like that. But, they did a good job at showing the interior of the airplanes. Very, very close.
All right, let's go backwards. President Clinton, favorite snack?
President Clinton's favorite snack.
Or favorite food?
He's a buffet guy.
Okay.
Okay? I mean, he loved Mexican. He loved Italian, and not a formal meal. A little bit of this, a little bit of that. But he also, the problem, he liked that stuff, but he's allergic to dairy.
Okay.
And he's allergic to alcohol. This is an Irishman would love to have a beer, but he can't do it.
Okay.
Now he's a vegan.
President Bush, favorite food, favorite snack?
Baby Ruth bars, and initially that kind of at the end of the administration we got into healthier food. Baby Ruth bars and pig skins. What do they call?
Pork skins?
Pork skins, yeah. Pork rinds.
Yeah.
Yeah.
President Reagan, favorite snack, favorite food?
His favorite dessert was lemon meringue pie. His favorite food was meatloaf, mashed potatoes, and macaroni and cheese.
President Carter?
Not necessarily. He was wide open.
Okay.
No, he liked sandwiches, sandwich meals, things of that nature. No one was into the fancy stuff. People would ask me, what did presidents eat? Now, I flew with Nelson Rockefeller, one of the richest guys in the world, Air Force Two. What did Nelson Rockefeller eat? What? Green seedless grapes, tuna fish, celery sticks, and carrot sticks. Because, you get to the position in life, you're the president, and you can eat,
Whatever you want.
but you can't afford to eat it.
Yeah.
You're like that, John.
Sure.
You can't eat.
You can't everything. Yeah,
you
not if I want to stay healthy.
If
right.
you want to, you can't eat everything that you want to eat.
I've seen and I've heard this story, and I wanted to get this. The line forms for the bathroom.
Oh, yeah.
That may be my favorite Howie story ever because of the people that were involved and what the former presidents had to do. Give us that story.
Well, yeah, to me, it's my favorite story.
It's a great story. It really
because it says a little bit about America.
Right.
And and the other story is never slam a door because you may have to walk back through it, so to speak. It was early in the Reagan administration, and President Sadat from Egypt got assassinated. Okay. And what's happening now during that politics, every time somebody over there gets out too far in the front, that could happen to him. Anyway, he got assassinated. President Reagan sent a delegation of people who dealt with him, tried to get a peace initiative, had a history with him. Reagan at the time didn't, so he sent a delegation. Well, and we had 26,000. That's the airplane that's in Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. That's the airplane that John F. Kennedy's body was flown back on. President Johnson was sworn in on it. We carried Mamie Eisenhower's body, Senator Dirksen. It's got all the history. So it's set up to be Air Force One. It's set up for a stateroom for the president and a conference room for the staff and a working staff area. This is what it's set up for. Well, our ranking passenger is Al Haig, Secretary of State. He's in the stateroom with his own bathroom.
Okay.
Second ranking passenger on the airplane is Caspar Weinberger. He's in the conference room with his staff. Now, the guests, the VIP guests, President Nixon, President Carter, President Ford, Henry Kissinger, and Mrs. Carter. They're seated in the staff area, the working staff area. If you can remember history, remember these names. President Nixon is sitting where Mr. Ehrlichman and Mr. Haldeman used to sit.
Boy, that's ironic, isn't it?
Is that ironic? Now, because you know a little history, you understand the ironicness about it. Well, anyway, we're going across the pond. We understand. We have a protocol problem. But the airplane's set up to fly Air Force One, not to do what we're doing. And so anyway, sooner or later, nature calls, and here comes President Carter. Now, which really touched me, I worked for this gentleman, just finished working for him as my commander-in-chief for 4 years, my president.
Mm-hmm.
And, that's the one thing. We respect the presidency. We respect the people's position.
The office. Not even if you disagree with the office holder, you respect the office.
Yeah, well, and we didn't even tend to disagree with anybody.
Right.
Okay?
Sure.
Anyway, he comes walking up to the front of the airplane very graciously and walks up to me and asks me if he could use the crew bathroom. Now, he was just my commander-in-chief,
sure.
and now he wants to use the crew bathroom. And I escorted him up. I said, of course, and the bathroom goes just prior to walking into the cockpit. And sure, and he walked in there. Immediately, I knew what was going on. Well, his bathrooms are in the back of the airplane.
Mm-hmm.
And to go to the back of the airplane, to go to his bathroom, he's got to walk past Helen Thomas.
And the media. There you go.
And Sam Donaldson.
Right.
Okay?
Sure.
And he doesn't want he's going to avoid that.
Right.
Okay? So he comes up to use the crew bathroom. So it was kind of a moment. It was definitely a moment for me.
Sure.
And so anyway, we're there. And next thing you know, here comes President Ford. I go, oh, I got history going on here. I got President Carter in the bathroom, President Ford, and he comes up and asks me if he graciously asked me, and I said, well, sir, yes, you can, but it's occupied right now. I didn't say who's in there for no other reason.
Sure.
Well, President Ford, we had a radio operator. We're standing at the radio console. Jerry Rankin is the radio operator. He flew with President Ford. We know these gentlemen. Okay,
sure. Yeah.
And we're making. He flew with him on Air Force One. He flew with him on Air Force Two. We know. So we're making small talk with President Ford. Next thing you know, here comes Henry Kissinger. Now my heart's going boom. Now remember, Henry's walking up, and Al Haig, the key of this, used to work for all these people.
Sure.
One capacity.
And he's got his own bathroom.
He's got his own bathroom. He was a low staff member for Kissinger at one time.
Sure.
Now Henry walks up. He doesn't ask me. He walks right to the bathroom, looks and sees it's occupied, and he comes back, and we're chit chatting, and we're having a common, nice, friendly chit chat.
Sure.
And talking a little bit about history and what we did, things of that nature. And finally, Henry says, I got to go back and tell Cappy, Weinberger, that the discipline in the military is slipping. And I said, well, why is that, sir? He said, because all you guys used to be scared to death of me.
Right. Now, and he's the one waiting for the bathroom.
Yeah. Then he turns to me. He says, Howie. I said, yes, sir. He said, who the hell's in the bathroom? I said, it's President Carter. And he took a book with him. He says, yeah.
That's a great line.
But it's the real thing.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
And these are the most powerful men in the world. Okay?
And they're waiting to use
on
the bathroom.
my bathroom. Okay? But anyway, so he says, yank his butt out of there. And I said, no, sir, we can't do that. So things calm down.
Mm-hmm.
And here comes Richard Nixon. Now that was a moment.
Right. Sure.
This guy was really powerful.
Yeah.
Okay. And Henry used to work for him, and Ford used to work for him, and Al Haig used to work for him. They all worked for him, and so he walks up. There was a gentleman named John Palmer, former flight attendant, when he was on Air Force One, when Nixon was on Air Force One. So he knows John, and that's a good thing to have that camaraderie, or that uniformity. And he looks at John. He didn't say a thing. He looks at John. He said, "When it's my turn, call me."
So
now, that's a moment in history.
So when did you decide you were going to write the book? You wrote the book, released in 2015. When did you decide you wanted to put all these things down?
Well, I'll tell you. I was working at it. It's a little bit of a story. I was working at the Brunswick County Airport. It was on a Friday, and I get a phone call from the Secretary of the Air Force's office. And they said to me, we'd like you and your wife, because my wife was an administrative assistant to President Carter and President Reagan, and she flew on the airplane as a crew member. We'd like you and Linda to accompany the airplane 27,000. That's the one they gave to Ronald Reagan's library. We'd like you as a former crew member with other crew members to accompany the airplane and give it to Nancy Reagan. I don't know what was wrong with me. I was late. It was hot in the summertime.
Sure.
Friday. I said, I thank you. I really appreciate it, but why don't you use all the resources of the crew members in the Washington area before we drive all the way up there and do that? Lady was very nice. Went home and told my wife. My wife says, what? Luckily, they called back the next day, and the lady on the phone said, Mr. Franklin, you don't understand. President Nancy Reagan wants you and Linda to be there. So
that's nice.
We go.
Sure.
So we're getting a big ceremony in Andrews, and we got treated like the presidency, with our airplane, and we leave. We got the Secretary of the Air Force on board, several congressmen, and the former crew. Press.
Mm-hmm.
Candace Brown was for the Today Show at the time. She did an interview. Well, John, since I've been here, I've been doing interviews. The one thing I learned about you guys in interviews, you don't want somebody that you're doing an interview to say yes, no.
Right. Oh, yeah.
So Candace Brown came to me and said, Howie, why did you come all the way from North Carolina to fly this airplane? I said, I've been from heaven and hell on this airplane.
Sure.
Okay. And so in the Rolodex, Today Show had my wife and I as former crew members. During the George W. second run for office, Today Show was doing a big thing on presidential and elections. They had a mock-up of Air Force One, and they invited my wife and I to be interviewed. Now, you know how they do it. It's not a quiz show.
Sure.
They want a good interview, so they told me to write 8 questions, and they'll pick the questions and the answers. So I did it. So and Al Roker did the interview. And at the end of the interview, he was so gracious. He said, Howie, I'd love to hear the rest of your stories. Well, within 30 minutes, several speaker bureaus called me up and said, and I went with APB Speakers Bureau out of Boston, who had Tom Brokaw, Gorbachev, and I was one of them also. I was really impressed. And every time I do a speech, people enjoyed it.
Yeah.
They enjoyed hearing this light stuff behind the scenes and things of that nature.
Oh, it's awesome. It's a great, I've seen it several times.
And getting some information. So anyway, at the end of a speech, people would come up and say, hey, you ought to write a book. And they would say that. Initially, you think they're being nice to you.
Yeah.
So anyway, finally, it kept happening. At every speech, people say, even local, they say, you got to write a book. And my wife said, you got to write the book. So that's how we wrote the book.
And did you enjoy that process?
It's work. Anybody write a book, it's a lot of work. And I mean, I talked to Marlon Fitzwater about it, things of this nature. The editing is incredible because I didn't want anything to be out of sort. I didn't want to be like that news person that got caught saying something that's not true. I wanted to be correct. I did catch something in my second printing. I recovered it. It said that it was during Clinton's second administration that I retired. No, it was the first. That's the only thing I caught. But the editing, it's a lot of work, right? Anybody who writes books, it's a task.
If I was going to call Howie on the phone, which I did to set this up, you answer the phone how?
Well, I did the same way I answered on Air Force One. When I was chief on Air Force One, I would answer the phone, Air Force One, what can we do to make your day a little nicer?
Where did that come from?
That's a great one, okay? I'm a young kid flying in and out of Taipei. I don't know anything about the Chinese, how they do business or anything like that. I'm very naive to things. And we would fly in there and spend 5 days, and we're taking people on R&R. Now, the only difference between me and my passengers were on leave, and I was getting paid. And I was there 2 weeks ago, so I know people, I know where to go. And the passengers in Taipei, they would order furniture, because you had this hand-done furniture over there in Taipei. So the day before we left to go back to Guam, all this furniture, the furniture companies would come out.
And deliver baskets of furniture.
Yeah, all this furniture. We'd have furniture hanging from the ceiling, So anyway, the whole crew, the pilots, the navigators, the NCOs, everybody would help load this airplane. Well, I'm a young airman, and I'm not thinking about staying in the Air Force, but I like what I'm doing. A new Chinese lieutenant colonel from Taiwan took over the security office, and he had a new policy. It was that I had to go to the gate and inventory every one of these furniture companies. Then I had to take the inventory sheet to his office, and then he would review it, take a copy, and it would go back. And then I would bring them on to the airport instead of them coming through checking it. And it was a rainy day. So by this time, I'm soaking wet going back and forth. And I knew enough Chinese to get me in trouble. And I'm sitting in the office. I go into the colonel's office. I said, can we expedite this a little bit? I said, you have a lieutenant sitting here having tea. Could he go? He goes out there. We do the same thing without going back and forth. And he wouldn't have it. So I said something in Chinese, means sagwadi. That means it's not good.
Mm-hmm.
And, of course, he lost face. I'm an NCO talking to a colonel. Okay?
Sure.
And I walked out, and I kept on doing what I did. Finally, the Air Force liaison, Lieutenant Colonel, comes out to my commanding officer. My pilot said that Colonel liaison inside wants to speak to the pilot and Sergeant Franklin. So we go in, found out he was offended. And we formally apologized, saluted him, apology, everything that we could do, and he wouldn't have it. He wouldn't have a thing to do with it. And he said, Sergeant Franklin's never going to be allowed back in the country of Taiwan. We're going to send a letter to the base commander. I mean, he really was upset.
Wow.
And we tried. It wasn't working good. Well, at the time, and remember I said I'm naive.
Right.
I was dating a young lady who was an opera singer in Taiwan, and her father was a 4-star general who fought the Reds in Chiang Kai-shek's army. He was tall. He was 6'2".
Right.
Okay. And he liked me. We used to go out and eat together, and I liked the food. And plus, I used to bring him 4 bottles of Jack Daniels Black.
That works.
And not Jack Daniels,
Johnny Walker.
Johnny Walker Black and things of that nature. But, so anyway, I went and naively told him I had a problem. I may not be seeing you again. And I told him what happened. I also found out that furniture companies called me and said, this guy's trying to get 10%. That's what he was doing.
Oh, I got you.
He was inventory so he could get 10% of whatever the
kickback. Yeah.
Kickback. That's what he was doing. That's normal over there.
Right.
Okay. So I mentioned that to the general, and we left. We go back to Guam. Boom. Okay. Couple of weeks later, we got a trip to Taipei. The pilot comes out to me, Howie, you get anything? I said, no. I said, you had anything? No. What should I do? He says, come on, go back on the trip. Okay, I don't know what to expect. So we get to Taipei. There's got clamshell doors in the back of the airplane. I crack the clamshell doors. I let these steps go down, and there is the lieutenant colonel of the Chinese Air Force standing there at attention. And I walk down the steps, and he looks at me. He said, oh, Sergeant Franklin, so good to see you. What can I do to make your day a little nicer?
Oh, that's where it came from.
Okay, what I found out, the general got it squared away and got 5% of his 10% and made it.
So he cut a deal.
Yeah, he cut a deal. So it became a win-win situation and a win-win for me.
Yeah.
I like the term. Now,
Yeah.
I want you to know, you wouldn't believe on Air Force One and at the airport, once in a while people, they don't care. But the times I get somebody saying, that's the nicest thing somebody
It is.
said to me today.
That's what I mean, and I picked it up. We've talked a couple of times to set this up today, and I picked that up, and it's an interesting thing, and it's an interesting way to greet people. It brightens the day.
Well, I speak around the country on 3 things. All you want to know about Air Force One, supreme customer service, and how to sustain a general aviation airport. Okay, and in customer service, I was just speaking to a large flight crew operation in Newark. You know who the most important the most important person in your organization is the person that answers the telephone.
Sure.
Here at your network.
Yeah.
Or then the person they meet. That person in your front desk. Now, according to grocery stores, now not that they all do it, they say the most important person is the person who bags your groceries. Can you see that?
Sure. Yes. Customer service.
Customer service.
Sure. Your day at the airport down there at Howie Franklin Field, that must have been an awesome day when that happened.
Yeah, I came home and told my wife, I said, you're not going to believe it. They named the airport after me, and I'm not dead yet.
Well, you do an awful lot, and you really have taken that airport. And like I said at the top of this, you're really a salesman for Oak Island and Southport, and not just the Cape Fear Jetport either.
Yeah, but I couldn't do it if it wasn't there. I got to know the product. I got to feel the product. Raleigh doesn't understand, and I still haven't been able to convince them how busy we are and why we're so busy. We got 60 miles of beach, best weather on the coast, 40 golf courses. Come on. We got the whole package.
Yeah.
And as I said, we're better weather than Charleston. We're better weather than Hilton Head. We don't, so it's easy. And if you've been around the world like I have, when my wife brought me there, now she took me down the end of Oak Island. I got out of the car, 1990, and here it was. I look up and I see sand dunes, sea oats, inlets, waterways on the west end of Oak Island, boats going down, oceans. Looks like Long Island.
Yeah.
Looks like the Hampton Bays, okay? Exactly. Only guess what? It was January 11th. It was 72 degrees.
Now that's why I've stuck around for as long as I have,
too.
too.
You're from Pennsylvania,
sure.
Correct?
Yeah. Yeah, I know what it's like. I appreciate you spending some time with me today. It's always a joy to speak to you, and I really, truly enjoy your stories. The book is Yes, Sir, Mr. President. I know you're proud of it. Thanks, Howie, for spending some time.
Thank you.
Howie Franklin proudly carries the banner of Southport and Oak Island now. You can find him at the Cape Fear Jetport in Oak Island. Online, that's capefearjetport.com. or HowieFranklin.com. And if you're lucky enough to visit his office, He'll show you the memorabilia he's collected over a lifetime of service to this country. Do yourself a favor. It's worth the trip. If you know of someone you think would be a good interview for a future episode of One-on-One, drop me an email, jevans@wect.com. You can also find me on Facebook and Twitter. I'm on those social media sites every day. I'm Jon Evans. Thanks for being with us for this episode of One-on-One.